Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for everybody for attending. It's good to see people's interest and to explore, I guess, the ongoing journey of AI. So just to sort of give us background to what we're going to do. So the idea is really to give an introduction to generative AI. I'm sure most of you have had a go at it, but it'll be some sort of introduction to the background of it and what it's good at and what it's not good at doing. Crafting effective prompts for tools. So that's quite important, I think, and you may well have your own experiences of this, but it's just looking at the literature, looking at what trying things out, and of course encouraging you to. What I'll say is, if you've got access to Copilot, so if you've got access to your computer, there will be points where I say it might be useful if you haven't had a go, or you've had we'll present a type of prompt that might be that you haven't seen before or you've not used, to have a go at using that as we go along. Then looking at generative AI for supporting quantitative and qualitative research. Again, I will put in the chat a data set you can have a go at. Again, if you haven't had a go at doing quantitative research, it's worth having a go, even in Copilot, even though it's not explicitly designed for it. It will do a job on the data set I'll give you. It's not too big. If it's too big, it struggles, and it does have. It's not as good as some of the bespoke quantitative apps that particularly look at quantitative research. I use AI for it, but it's still fine. It's still okay. And then qualitative research, I've got a link to an AI and an interview bot that I designed just for collecting interviews, and then later on I'll show you one I'm doing. For those who know, it's qualitative research anyway. It's of an IPA analysis, so interpretive phenomenological analysis. So those who've done psychology, particularly health psychology, might be familiar with that. So it's an AI bot to do that, and I'll share that rather than having a go at doing it. And we'll be looking at the strengths and weaknesses of some of those things and things you might look at before we hopefully get round to looking at ethical considerations, which a bit more tenuous because we haven't got any real direction from Newman, and there's a debate going on about it generally in the wider communities. But we'll have a look at some of the issues potentially with ethical considerations about its use in production more than anything else, rather than it's the ethical considerations of how much energy AI models take to sort of train. So started really, or certainly we can trace the idea of artificial intelligence back to Alan Turing's seminal paper in 1950, quickly followed by a project at the Dartmouth Summer School in the States. Again, these were sort of the foundational things for AI models. And we got the first chatbots in 1966. Not quite the same, but as the chatbots now, they weren't using any sort of generative AI. They were very much more program-led, but still nonetheless. As far as the sort of hints of what we do now, it was really Geoffrey Hinton's back propagation that started that off. And it led to, as we'll see a bit later on, but we've got Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov at chess in 97. Took quite a lot longer before we got AlphaGo to defeat Lee Sedol at Go. So Go's more challenging in a sense than chess, less rule-based potentially. But the real sort of the explosion in AI now in what we call transformer models, that's the common things like behind Copilot, like ChatGTP and others, is what's called a transformer model. And this was the paper that introduced that in 2017. So a short time ago, and a massive explosion since, and it's exponential rise. So it's the sort of architecture behind all of the main models that you'll see. And it's obviously not just able to generate text, but it's also able to do lots of other things as well, including games, recognize images, protein structures, etc., etc. So it's transformer models that we'll be using as generative AI models. They are text-based models, but they, as I say, they work with other things like other types of information as well, like pixels in images. But you give a text prompt and the most probable word comes out next. It basically changes it into a number and it gets transformed through things. So you get some input, you get an encoder, a decoder, and then some output. What it looks like, so this is an example of what it might look like, or a video of the inner workings, if you like, of it. And you'll see that the inputs, the embedding inputs on the left, and then we get the probabilities. So words, what's the next probable word comes out. So in the case of this last sentence, we got world, should I say? So that was the highest probability. Well, not quite. Way was one that was a bit higher, but there'll be particular things. And what you do get, and it'll only really be useful, I guess, if you're thinking about making your own apps, is what's called temperature. So that'll depend how random or deterministic the model is in generating words. But let's just have a look at what it looks like on this. So what it's doing is there'll be an input, the next word comes, and it's a full stop. So 44%. High probability, so that artificial intelligence is transforming the world, full stop. Then 26, 20, it's not the second most probable it was, but in this particular model where it looks at the whole context so it keeps coming out, and this is sort of how AI is generated, whether these happen to be words or pixels. In this case, we're looking at words, but they're turned into tokens, which are numbers, and then you get probabilities on them. So it's coming into this is how it works behind the scenes, obviously much faster, but that's sort of an example of how an AI model works. Now, in terms of how these perform, well, there was some papers out that, saying actually ChatGPT beats humans on a lot of tasks, and in some cases it has, and these are the tasks that an older model than the models currently out, ChatGPT 3, and these are on some of the tasks they gave it. So as you see, the darker blue is the AI model, and that outperformed all of the on average at least all of the humans. They found there was a particularly abstract pattern recognition, and they surpassed human capabilities. Zero shot is what they did, and that's just a single statement. The humans beat GTP models, though, in a more recent study from Bristol and or at least Santa Fe, but we've got here where this was counterfactual problems. So problems where they wouldn't have seen before. So the models would not have seen these before. These were invented to be counterfactual, so they required imagination. And humans outperformed all of the models, including a newer model, ChatGPT 4, on this. So we've got in this paper saying, I think, that they learn differently than humans. I think they learn, they are learning, but it's a very different type of learning. It's a very different type of intelligence. But the idea that they learn language first and then grasp abstract get the knowledge to grasp abstract concepts afterwards, where humans learn concepts first and then language afterwards to describe them. So a different way, and that does lead to different outcomes in terms of what we might end up with, even though they are very convincing in terms of many things they do. So popular AI models, there's lots of them, and these are certainly not all of them. There's loads. A lot of them have got free versions, but also paid versions where they're generally better models and they do better things. But all of them all these generative AI require writing prompts. And even though prompt engineering often is associated with building your own apps with AI, which is definitely possible, it's also, when you're trying to interact with these models, it's useful to have some ideas about what should I do when I'm writing prompts, and what different types of prompts has people researched and tried. And of course, we're constantly trying, and new models come out all the time. Let's have a look at what the type of prompts are. Well, if we look at very broadly, and we'll look at some of these in more detail, we won't necessarily call them the same names. We'll call them the general technical names later. But we've got sort of exploratory prompts where we might do a zero-shot prompt to get a really open, broad open question, single question asking for something, where we might explore ideas. We'll have a look at some examples of these. Customized prompts, where it might be more structured and we try and get the AI model to fill in the blank. Contextual prompts, we might give some context to the situation, either what we'll call role play prompts later on, where we say that the AI model's doing something or being someone, responding in some particular way. Step-by-step prompts, which can be useful if we need to iterate things over time. We'll again have a look at some examples. Evaluation prompts, where we want to, in fact, ask the model to evaluate their own response. And follow-up prompts, where we constantly keep asking. And these are not necessarily the technical terms. We'll try and use the technical terms in the literature when we look at examples of the prompts. So if we just say initially we've got this is Copilot, and this is Copilot, and this is from Copilot's idea of what we should be doing, and it's reasonable. It's reasonable across all. So we've got a goal. So what type of response do we want Copilot or any other generative AI model to produce? And so we wanted, what type of response do we want? Well, in this, an example is provide continuous prose in British English. Normally, the models will write in American English, so you have to prompt it to ask for British English. The context, so what do we want the context we want Copilot to consider, or any other AI model. And in this particular case, this is obviously an example, suitable for an academic audience. So we want to we're providing the context of the tone of the language and the response. What information do we want them to use? Well, we might say we may provide it with literature, we may provide it with other information that we want it to use, rather than get its own, but we might want it to get its own. It depends, but we need to give it that sort of idea about the type of information we want. And then the expectations. So do we want it in bullet points? It often produces information in bullet points if we don't say produce it in continuous prose and paragraphs, for example. But it depends on what we're trying to prompt it for. But these are reasonable. This is part of, you get from Copilot Lab. This is the sort of, these are the, one of their suggestions. So it's worth, if you've not had a play at all, to have a look at there and start there. If this is very new to you. If not, you probably had a go at doing some of these things already. But let's have a look at other places you might look where we've got the AI platform as a prompt. It's again, in the main, designed for those who are going to use their AI APIs in apps, but you can still use it to learn and see what results it suggests doing. And there's some preprints on some various things that have looked at useful ways of coming up and research different types of prompts and how successful they are in different things. If you prefer books, there's a couple of books already out on these, and these are still not too far behind this. So there's a couple of examples here. O'Reilly and Wiley are presenting books. I'm sure there's new ones come out all the time. So let's have a look at the first type of, the most basic prompt, if you like. It's called zero-shot prompting. And at the end of this little bit of a section on prompting, I'll say, if you've got it, we'll give 5 minutes for you to have a go, at least if you've not had a go before, or if you've not had a go at some of the types of prompts, to have a go at some of the types of prompts in Copilot or some other transform model that you've got. So in zero-shot prompting, there are no examples provided. So you don't get any examples. You just rely, you ask a response and it just relates to its pre-trained data. So it's nothing more than that it's got already in its memory. So what does it look like? Well, for example, we're trying to, as I mentioned before, we might want it to be creative. If you're not suggesting anything, so we might say something like, suggest 4 innovative research topics in the field of psychology, for example. So it's effective in idea generation. It taps into the model's broader knowledge without the bias of previous examples, but it will have biases. Models have biases because they're trained on data. So it's important to note there is biases in it's not bias free in the sense that what it was trained on, it will work out, it will try and use that. So this is in Copilot. And here's some, again, those are psychologists. So I'll have to say whether these are reasonable or not, but these are some of the things it came out with when we asked it for a zero-shot prompt to just saying 4 innovative research topics in psychology. So we've got the impact of virtual reality therapy on PTSD treatments, and it goes, gives a sort of what that is about. We've got the role of the microbiome in mental health, that's gut health. There is something I've just seen on brain biomes that might be interesting as well, but it didn't come up with that. Artificial intelligence in predicting and preventing mental health crises, and the psychological effects of remote working on employees' well-being. So these you'll have to decide whether and you always have to. So that, you know, if you're not happy with these and you were trying to get this to generate it, you could delve back in again. But it seems on the surface, to me at least, these are reasonable. Those who are psychologists will have to sort of make their own mind up, but at least it's an example of a zero-shot prompt with what seems to be reasonable outputs. There are some useful tweaks to zero-shot prompting. This particular, and I've got the references for all these in the back if you want to have a look further, using what we call a role play prompt. So rather than just saying what you want, you can actually say what you think the specific role of the LLM, the large language model is, so the transformer model you put it in, say ChatGTP or Copilot. And there's also a role feedback prompt, so you can ask it to see, you know, to confirm whether it's took on that role. So we'll have a look at a couple of examples now. So this is, I'll put my PhD thesis in, just to and this is what I asked it, essentially. So I asked it really, oops, it's gone off. Let me try and pause that. Oops. Try and pause it if I can, just so you can see. Yeah, so I'm saying to this is the role bit. You are a highly experienced PhD external examiner with an expertise in psychology, statistical analysis, and qualitative research methods. My PhD involved mainly quantitative, but it did have a qualitative chapter. And it did have some fairly sort of sophisticated statistical analysis. So that was the prompt. I asked it to acknowledge its result, so confirm your understanding of the role, that it does accept that role, and then ask it to give me some questions. So formulate some questions, set of questions. I want to try and say what these are: PhD candidate, psychological theories, so acknowledging the role, confirming that they have got that, and then a few things and offer constructive feedback on the thesis. So I'm asking it some questions, but also some constructive feedback. So it confirms, and then it provides some examples of what questions on the various areas, and it produces those quite quickly. This was a fairly fast model. It's not the latest model in ChatGTP, but it was in ChatGTP. It was Orion, so 4 Orion, 40. And so it does acknowledge the role. And then it asks some, to be fair, reasonable questions. If I was looking, and I do, you know, looking at this, I would say that these are actually some of the questions that were asked, not all of them. Some of the questions were on my actual Viva, these were asked. Time's gone on since I did my Viva, but these are actually reasonable. And some of them, they weren't picked up on, but, you know, I did use some autoethnography, and I think I probably should have justified that more. I got away with it. I didn't have really any changes, but I probably should have done. And I think this is a reasonable sort of way of going about. I'm going to zoom on a little bit. So it's asking about multi-level modeling, which is what I did, classified models. And it's suggesting that I might even try Bayesian analysis, which is, for those who know me, will know, well, I definitely have now, and probably would say that as well. So it gives some suggestions for improvement. So I think it does a decent job on that role sort of play. That sort of role play prompt is quite useful, and I've used it now quite a lot, giving a distinct role for the AI model to take and confirming it's understood that. Now, another type of prompt is called one-shot prompting. So this is a single example. So rather than just asking it for a task, it's actually giving some information. So in this case, using the following guidelines from Frontier's author guidelines, the title should be concise, omitting terms that are implicit. Where possible, be a statement of the main result or conclusion presented in the manuscript. Abbreviation should be avoided in the title. Then I give it a couple of very different titles, but that actually have been used in Frontiers. So they're a study topic and a title, and then asking it for a different study topic. So I'm giving it a pattern to follow, but asking it to produce something else. And this is what would be one-shot prompting. So what it's come out is, it said, the prolonged use of social media platform diminishes attention span in young adults. So it's tried to follow the guidance, and it used those examples as a way of doing it. Of course, you can carry on iterating and saying that wasn't good enough or doing something else, but this is an example of a one-shot prompt. It becomes something different if you carry on doing that. And obviously you do really, in reality, mix a lot of these types of prompts up. Then we've got a few shots prompt. So this is where we get, rather than just one example, we might give more than one example, and to try and again to get a pattern. So for example, on this, improve the academic tone of the following sentence, and it gives some examples. So original, the revised, original and revised, and then it's saying what we want it to do based on the previous examples. So I found out that social media can influence election results. We want to see whether, given the patterns we've given it, whether that actually changes on that. And this is what it revised it as. So this is how I found out that social media can influence. It revised, it said, this research explores the influence of social media on election outcomes. So again, it's an example. These are obviously quite simple examples, and I'm sure you could have come up with a better example, a better title yourself, but they're just examples of how this is used. Chain of thought prompts are where you do a step-by-step breakdown, and you carry on iterating. So first prompt, allow a response, proceed with another response, potentially involving the previous one, the response of the previous one, and you continue iteratively across the response, and depending on when you're happy with what you've got. So for example, analyze the factors influencing student motivation in online learning. It's come up with certain things, and given that, I want to delve a little bit deeper about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. I want self-determination theory. I want to look a bit deeper, but it's given me some things to look at. So based on its output, I might want to ask something else. Prompt 3, identify and address challenges in maintaining student motivation in online learning environments. Again, it's given me some information, and I will then evaluate the effectiveness. It's even took my spelling mistake that's in there. I've got an O in front of implement, and it didn't make any difference. It's pretty good usually at ignoring spelling mistakes. So again, it gives some examples, and of course, as useful, it does give some sources, and it's definitely worth looking at the sources. Any of these given you, if they don't explicitly give you sources, it's well worth asking for. Can you give me the sources that you are basing your response on? Because that will mean you can fact check the responses and be reasonable in doing that. Evaluation prompting. So evaluation prompting is generally often used when you're producing models yourself and now evaluating the response, but you can use it for your own just prompting general models as well, rather than based on ones you might do. So for example, this is an example. You're an expert editor tasked with evaluating. So we've got that role play response in there. So even these are different responses, still using that context. Evaluating the quality of the research article summary. So this is the summary produced by a model. Saying the original article, we need to provide a model with it, ask it to produce a summary, and then ask it to evaluate its own response. Now again, I've done this in a standard AI bot, a standard AI model, and it's not the best way to do it, but we'll see anyway. It's given it just to show you that it's given some categories, fairly brief categories, one very simplistic categories, but I'm asking it to judge its own response in terms of those particular things, those criteria. So this was the original article I put in. I'm asking it for the summary. I'm asking it for those things, rate 5 to 1. I uploaded the article to Copilot, which you can do a little drag and drop or click on the sort of paperclip and link your file to it. This is what it came out with in terms of the criteria. So it gave itself the highest score on justification, to give some background to it. It gave it the highest score on justification of keyword extraction. It gave it a 4 on sentiment analysis, and it said it could have been more explicit, but mostly it got 5. That's not usually, that as I say, that's usually how, that sort of numerical approach is usually how you would do it if you're training a model yourself for your own sort of app. But here's an example of, again, my PhD, just I think it wasn't fair to do anybody else's, to ask it, again, I'll show you what I'm asking it. I'm asking it to evaluate its response. So again, highlight, confirm that you are, role of expertise in this time the introduction chapter, provide a detailed introduction, a critique of the introduction, offer actionable recommendations to enhance, and the important thing for this, evaluate your feedback, reflect on the critique, assess the thoroughness and relevancy of feedback, and identify any potential biases. So what does it come up with? So it acknowledges it's a role of expertise, it's saying the things, it's giving in-depth analysis, and it's self-evaluation feedback. What it says is, as you can see there, it's saying it appears to be thorough in addressing critical areas of lit review, comprehensiveness, methodological justification. The feedback balances constructive critique with specific actionable recommendations. In terms of biases, the critique may lean towards expecting more robust theoretical framework because it's an academic preference for explicit methodological articulation. So it's giving it's evaluating its own model, which I think is an interesting thing to do. Common mistakes to avoid before we have a go at doing have a play. If you've not played with these, let's just go back to it. So don't be overly vague. So try and avoid ambiguous language. In fact, sometimes slang, for example, is one of the things that produces hallucinations, but it's definitely better to try and be as clear as you can. Don't overcomplicate things. Do provide context. So if you want a specific output, you definitely need to tell it what you want. Don't do ambiguity. Don't try and be ambiguous in terms of when things can be interpreted in multiple ways. It's not as good. Try and give explicit examples if you want a particular thing done. Do provide the desired format. If you don't, you'll get it in whatever it wants to present it in. So if you want it in continuous prose, or you want it in bullet points, or you want it in British English spelling, you need to tell it that. Do set boundaries. You might want to limit it. You only want a paragraph or a sentence, or do make explicit what you want. Do iterate. So do read it, and you don't have to accept the first answer at all. Do try and shape what you want to make sure you get exactly the sort of output that you need, whatever that is, whether it's idea generation or polishing work off. Asking open-ended questions is great if you're trying to generate ideas, but if you want a definitive answer that's precise, then that's not the best thing to do. So if we review before you have a go, and we look at sort of quantitative and qualitative research, give direction, specify the format that you want it in. You might want headings, you might want titles, you might want bullet points, you might want continuous prose without headings. Provide examples if you can, as some of the examples we used earlier. And evaluate the quality and get the model to evaluate quality as well. So you evaluate it, but you can also get the model to and reiterate and reassess what you've got and change the prompt if you need to. Right, so we'll pause there at this point. I'm not going to spend too long because I know we want to try and get finished by sort of 5:15. But have a go. So before we move on to, split it up into multiple tasks chained together. Didn't get that on the end. So before we have a go at doing that, I just do want, so we have a go in a second, but I just do want, if you haven't had a go at Notebook LM, it's free to use, at least at the moment. You have to sign up to it, but this is an example of putting again, so you can have a go at this if you want to in the 5 minutes. It puts summaries in, it'll summarize papers, more than one, but it also produces, it'll both be an interactive exercise, but it also produces a podcast. So I'll just give, while you're thinking about maybe getting your, I'll just play this because it comes at the end with a snippet of bits of the product. So this is what I've put in. It's an article I wrote. Well, it's actually a book chapter, quantifying uncertainty for sport and exercise scientists. So it's a book chapter. It describes it. So I did it because I obviously know it very well because I wrote it. So I've asked it a question about, Bayesian confidence intervals and traditional confidence intervals, Bayesian credible intervals. And what you get then is you load the conversation. And what it does is it turns it into a podcast. It's actually not too bad at all. Again, this is just snippets of it so you can get the flow.
Hey everyone, you ready to get those brains fired up? Today, we're doing a deep dive into how data is shaping the future of sports.
And that's why understanding the limitations of data is just as important as understanding its power. But here's the thing. What if that 1 minute improvement is based on a super small sample size, like you only tested it on 5 runners? And what if their times were all over the place to begin with? That 1 minute average might not be as meaningful as it seems at first glance.
Okay. So it's not just about the raw numbers, it's about the context.
Exactly.
So to everyone listening, if you're ready to dive even deeper into the world of sports data, I highly recommend checking out this research article. Who knows? You might just find your next aha moment.
Quantitative analysis. There are a number of platforms that deliver it. So, for example, Julius is one that's actually focused on doing AI. You can get there is a free but a limited number of shots on the free version. Julius AI, but there's also in ChatGTP there's a data analysis bit. They generally use what's called a sandbox, so that they can be fairly secure in terms of your data. So that, certainly that both of those, Julius and Julius AI and ChatGTP data analysis are secure, but they're paid. They come preloaded with Python libraries. So Python's, if you're not familiar with it, it's a coding language. It's fairly flexible, but it's also used for data science. And they've usually got code preloaded. So you've got preloaded libraries in there. They're fairly, as I say, they don't access the self. They don't have the broader infrastructure. So if you're using data analysis in ChatGPT, it won't access anything else. It won't access the internet, for example. It just stays in that what's called a sandbox. So your models are not shared or trained with third parties. So they obviously want that because people do have sensitive data when they're actually analysing the data. So particularly, businesses don't want to share their data, and obviously researchers don't as well. The data's generally stored for a short period, depends on the model, and you can also ask when the model was trained to, what date it was trained up to, or you can get the information quite easily. I think the latest AI models on ChatGPT were October 2023, but it's you can confirm that if you want to yourself. They can be restricted to the preloaded packages. So as we'll see in a moment, some of the more sophisticated models where they haven't got the package loaded can be problematic. You have to have a workaround, but I'll show you what that might be. So here's an example. Try to use Copilot, but also give an example in ChatGPT. So I'm loading a data setup. This is called metadata. So what I want it to do is just clean the data. I want to try and highlight in this health set data. I'm asking it to give me some histograms, and so I can identify outliers that might be unreasonable values. And then I'm going to ask it to impute these values. So if you've done quantitative research, you might know that. Now, it's come up with the first one. It didn't come up with the other ones for some reason, but it came up with the first one. It's come up with the right numbers. It's telling me the outliers, but it hasn't given me the visuals on all of them. It usually does, but in this case it didn't. But what it's done is it's telling me where the value is an outlier. So clearly you probably most likely incorrectly inputted, an extra zero or just a mistyping in a spreadsheet, for example. So I can't see, other than the first one, I can't see the others. But then I can ask it to remove outliers for the ones where it found those things, impute the missing values, and provide a download link. So this can be done. For me, I find this useful doing it on my phone, so I can get to when I've got to analyse my data on a computer. It's done it, and it's provided a download link, not immediately, but I have to keep iterating and say, can you do it again? Can you process it? So be persistent, because it did say it's provided one, it hasn't. So I had to try a couple of times, and then it did give me a download link with, it's a fairly basic imputation method it used, but it did do it in the end. So now it gave me a clean data set, and I was able to download a clean data set, but I had to be a bit persistent. So it gave me the data set as I requested in the end. It was a basic method of imputation, but I didn't tell it what to do. I didn't give it a method particularly. Let's have a look, for example, on the data analyst in ChatGPT, a little bit more sophisticated in the sense that it's supposed to do this. So exactly the same thing, give it the same messy data, asked it to do the same things, asked it to give me I put exactly the same prompts in, giving me, just saying exactly how I wanted the variables done, and it gave me the data set, what the data set was. In this case, it has come up with all of the graphs with the outliers in there that I obviously deliberately put in. And then it comes up with doing a clustering analysis for imputation. And I could have asked for other things, but at least that's relatively sophisticated, not amazingly, but relatively sophisticated. And you can try you can see now it says now interactive. You can try and be interactive with these plots, which I don't think Copilot gives you that option. It gives you a standard output in that sense. So again, it's giving me, I'll zoom it on a little bit, that it's giving me, telling me where the outliers are, much the same as the other one did. I'm asking it to remove the outliers for the things where it was, and it gave me the data. It did do this, and it gave me the data set which I could check, and I checked for it to be pretty accurate, and I found it to be relatively accurate on cleaning data. So that was, it's worth thinking about if you've got, I don't know, I use R a lot, and I can't use that. Well, I could use it on my phone, but I don't. You have to sort of set it up to do that. But I can clean data on the way home or when I've got the phone, and it will set the game going. So it's worth thinking about. And I've still got some more. Where's that gone? There was another. Is this another data set I missed out on? I think I did. Yeah. This is an analysis bit. Yeah, so college success. I can load this in, the people want to have a go at this. So college success, this time I'm going to ask you to do some analysis for me. So it's giving me some basic information, means and standard deviations of each this data set. The data set is a grade point average, and it's American data set, and it's got various scores, and it's providing some descriptive statistics on that. Contains no missing values. I'm asking it to provide a correlation matrix, which again Copilot does okay. It gives me the correlation matrix, which tells me the relationships between each of the values. It also interprets them for me to a point. It'll say what it is. And then I'm asking it how well it predicts GPA. So how well does, it's basically doing a regression for me. So those who know what regression is, it's coming up with an R-squared value. It's giving me the coefficients, and it's giving me a p-value. It can ask for other things as well. Asking it to do a plot, and it's giving me confidence intervals on the plot. It's plotting out the data, regression line and confidence interval. I'm also then going to ask it for, give me some insights. That's good. It'll tell me that. And of course, I can ask that again. I can do that. But I'm also asking it for prediction intervals, which are less commonly used. So I wanted to see whether it would cope with that okay. And it did. It actually produced prediction intervals on that, which are slightly different than confidence intervals and less used. So I was just seeing what the training was done in that sense, and it did okay. And then I asked it to perform a Bayesian regression, and it can't, and nor can Julius, to be honest. So it did produce, which was quite good. It did produce a Python, which I do use on occasion, but I wanted to produce an R code for it. So I asked it to do that. It produced R code, which is called the BRMS package, and it gave me a prior on it as well. For those who know about Bayesian analysis, you set up what you know about the thing first, and I asked it to justify the prior. So this is a case of digging into it. I did in a case when I dig a little bit, it does come up with something mostly it's accurate. Mostly it's very accurate. It's saying, I'm asking it in the end, this is fine when it gives this. I also then say, why did you choose the non-default prior in the BRMS model? So you can ask it anything you want to, basically, just an idea of asking it different things. And it said, let's just zoom on with that. Yeah, it's generally fine until it says that normal, those who again know about statistics, that it's saying a normal value is likely to be more robust than a t value, a student t, and it's not. Student t's got longer tails. It's less likely to be pulled by different things, so it's less robust. But generally, it's good. So there is a bit on where it was questionable. That bit there can be influenced by extreme values due to its heavier tails. It's not really. It's the opposite, really. It's not really true. Normal distributions more likely to be, but it still was pretty good. So that's quantitative analysis, and I know we're tight for time, so I can't. There's lots more I could show you, but I'm not. Qualitative analysis, so the possibilities. So there's a number of people who've produced things about conducting qualitative interviews with AI bots. There's one, in fact, that did a really big study, but a number of people did. So I thought I'd produce a bot myself. So I basically asked, this was one on, I want to do something about AI in higher ed anyway, generally about students. So I gave it some interview topics rather than questions because I wanted it. So this was Streamlit's. I'm going to let you have a go at this bot if you've got at least 5 minutes to have a go. I'll leave it open for a bit afterwards. It does cost me money, not a great deal, but I'm not going to leave it completely open free for all time because it does cost a few. Not $1, but it costs a fraction of $1 each time people use it. So I will let people have a play with it for for some time after. But I'm asking it to do these interview topics. So it's sort of, I guess, what you might put in a prompt. Really, I've just put it in an app. I've then said things like, you're an experienced interviewer in higher education, focusing on AI applications using British English in your research spellings, and specifically spell it without a Z. After each user response, provide brief feedback. So I'm telling the model what to do and ask relevant follow-up questions based on their answer. Tailor your questions to the user's previous response, avoiding repetition, exploring areas that have already been covered. And in this, there is a model I've put. So I put, this is ChatGTP-4 Orion, and a temperature, which I mentioned before about temperatures. When you're setting up your own models, you do include a temperature. Now, temperatures, so lower temperatures produces more focused, conservative responses. So more sort of less creative, if you like. Moderate temperature is what I use, 0.6, gives a balance between creativity and consistency, and higher temperatures might be more creative. So if you want a more creative bit of your app, and in fact you can do this at different stages in your app, but I'll set this at a simple example at 0.6. So this is what you sort of do, and the password's in there, and if you want to put it in there, I've put the password in, which will change later on, but it won't at this moment. So what you do is you submit the password, and then you hit submit again. It just gives you agree. You won't if you've got any issues, the usual sort of stuff. So it says, can you introduce yourself? So I've said my name's Tony Myers. I gave some details about myself. It's also based on Mark, who had a go at this, Mark Holland. I've got a progress bar now in this, so people know how far they've got. So it gives a response based on what I've said and asks another question related to what the topics are I wanted to know about. So I've said about, again, my response, submit the answer. Again, it reads the answer and it gives another question based on my answer. It's giving me some feedback. It's insightful, sort of reinforces what I've said, but also then asks me a next question about any challenges. And I'm able to say, so it's responding in a realistic type way. And in the end, you download the transcript, or it can be emailed depending on what you're doing. This is, again, a fairly simple example, but relatively effective. Unlike quantitative research, where there's only a couple of paradigms, really, there's lots of different models, but a couple of paradigms, Bayesian, traditional. qualitative research is a much broader church of different types of analysis. And one of them, so I'm just trying one that we use several different sorts, but one of them we used, and I've used with a number of PhD students, is something called interpretive phenomenological analysis, IPA. So I decided, well, might as well build a bot with this and see how it gets on with this. So it's exploring people's individual sense, how they make sense of their personal world. It's grounded in phenomenology, and it gives sort of an examination of lived experiences. It's interpreting lived experiences. So the usual process is that it looks a bit like that with all the cut up bits of paper you've got, trying to make, making notes in the margin and trying to find out, quotes that might support a broader theme. So a type of thematic analysis. In the model, I did say you're an expert qualitative researcher specialising in interpretive phenomenology analysis. Please use British English, spelling in all responses. Max tokens depends on how much I'm prepared to spend on it. It generates initial notes. So I'm giving it stages. So stage 1, IPA analysis, participants' response in the transcript. Shouldn't include interviewer questions because the transcripts often do include interviewer questions. And I'll give it a temperature. So this temperature is quite low. So this is more deterministic, more consistent. I want it to use the stuff to make notes that are on the transcript and not go too much off piste. Then they try and formulate experiential statements. This is a slightly newer version than some of the versions we've used, where you've got superordinate and subordinate themes. Now you've got what's called experiential statements, and then we get personal and then group experiential statements. So this now is saying, based on the following initial notes, it's using the initial notes generated, formulate some experiential statements. And then this is a little bit, very slightly less deterministic. Then clustering the personal experience. I'm giving it again, it's asking for some various things: verbatim quotes, British English spelling, researcher comments. I'm asking for the researcher, which is the bot in this case. This time I'm giving it a bit more of a higher temperature, a bit more creative in terms of producing things. So let's have a look at an example. Was one that me and Alex Powell did on developing mental toughness from Paralympians, and it was based on 10 interview transcripts. This is what he got out of it. So it's about determined, defiant, pragmatic, optimistic. They had independence. They had sort of a sense of escape, normalization. They wanted to feel normal, connection with others, non-accepting, pain management, control. I'm running the IP analysis. I've modified it now to a couple of different things. But what it does, it generates the transcripts. So it processes the experiential statements and then comes out with all the transcripts, and then it comes up with the group experience. So it's it's obviously not been quite this quick. It takes about 5 minutes to do 10 transcripts, and that was 78,000 words. So it did it much quicker. I was a bit annoyed because he did this, and it took him weeks to do. So it's coming up with the initial notes, the experiential statement for each participant, and the personal experiential themes, and giving quotes with these. And some of them are actually quite similar that you can download the report. And this is sort of, so mental toughness, resilient, pain and progress, define limitations, then call different things. I also asked it to be sort of more creative in that, but actually a number of synergies. So, but there's some ethical considerations. ChatGPT was going to have to catch students cheating. They were going to have. They put in initially, or at least talk about putting a watermark that would mean it could be, if the people used it, it could be directed. They decided not to do that because 30% of the people paying for ChatGPT said they wouldn't use it, so they stopped doing it. Yeah, but one of the things I think we probably want to think about is that whatever you produce using AI, you can't blame AI. They will produce, it is biased, it will produce hallucinations, and it has got other limitations. You are responsible for what you put into something. And that's the case, whatever you do. So it's checking that the analysis is correct. If you've got it to generate qualitative research or quantitative research, check it it's important to check it. You're responsible for it, and you know that there can't be authors or co-authors. The agency falls with you, so it's still you. You want to be honest with it, but that's the case. Transparently, I'm a big believer anyway in open science, and would say that we should be the same. If you're going to use it, I try and actually pre-register studies on the Open Science Forum, for example, and saying what prompts you made. And this is what I get students to do. Say, what prompts have you used? How have you refined those prompts? What other information have you given to the model? And so that, you know, we do have to say that even if you do exactly the same responses, you wouldn't necessarily get the same back out, but at least you can say what you put in. So being transparent, because it's good to be reproducible, even though you won't be exactly reproducible. People will be able to follow what you've done. Like you can't, in qualitative research generally, you can't exactly do the same as someone else did, because people respond differently. In the same with AI. Always avoid using it verbatim. I'd say check it. You can you can use it if you're putting lots in and ask it to polish work. I think that's fine. I think you do need to provide an attribution. So always get it to check the sources. And this is my ideas rather than the universities or anybody else's, even though there is a debate around some of these things. If you have used it, you might want to note what model you've used and what context you've used it in. You might want to use plagiarism tools to identify, because it's been trained on things. It might be very similar to published content, so you need to check it that you don't get nicked for plagiarism, even if you haven't. If you've used an AI model, going, I've used an AI model, didn't copy. And students have to think about that as well, I guess, whether they're PhD students or undergraduates, and think about the statements. Declarative statements have to come from somewhere, so do request the source and check it, so you're getting on with the right sort of information. I guess final thoughts: act as the expert with generative AI as your assistant, not the other way around. I mean, if you've got any coding experience, and some of you may have, I don't know who's on the call, do play with the AI models. They're actually quite interesting. I'm actually thinking about playing with doing some marking work, looking at AI marking work, a bot to mark some work, just to test it. Don't blindly use AI outputs or shortcut to get ready-made results without putting in the work. Some of the students do, undergraduates, and it's been not very good. You do need to be very systematic in how you do it. Do the research and lay the groundwork for AI to become more productive, rather than just putting very minimal things in and hoping you get a lot out. Do educate yourself on how the tools work, and partly if you're interested in this and you haven't seen some of this before, that might at least be part of the way in doing that. But do think about playing with it, have a go at doing it, but do keeping up with the what happens in new models. The models are the worst they're probably going to be. So they're only going to get better, and they're likely to grow. I think ChatGPT 5 is supposed to be coming out this year, and they're supposed to be doing some things that haven't been able to do before. It might well be all bluster, but still, they are still pretty impressive. Don't use AI as a replacement for your own expertise or critical thinking. I think that's really important. You've got to build that in, but they are very useful tools. References are there. I've put on there some of those frameworks that I've mentioned, but also some slightly additional things about prompt engineering, etc., that might prove to be useful. I've finished for questions. I don't know whether can people ask questions. If people want to ask questions, you're welcome to do that.